Welcome to the channel. We've all seen poker rivalries at the table. You'll have one guy or one lady that, wants to get under the skin of another player just to try to, outsmart them. Or then you just have another person who's generally disliked by everyone, and then they kind of get under the skin of everyone. It happens at the table. And usually these rivalries will play themselves out for one hand or maybe for a session. But some rivalries play themselves out for years. And this happens in the world of professional poker. And this series is going to cover those types of rivalries. This first rivalry video is going to focus on the rivalry between Daniel Negreanu and Annie Duke. Some of you may know of this, others may not. It's an interesting story and I hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, I'd appreciate it if you click the like button. And if you're not a subscriber to the channel, I'd appreciate it if you click the subscribe button. YouTube goes absolutely mental over people clicking and interacting with their service. So it helps them, it helps us, it helps the channel, and I really do appreciate it. Thanks. Let me start by asking, how many of you remember rec.gambling.poker on the internet? This goes back, this is way pre-Twitter and all that. Rec.gambling.poker, or RGP, was the way that players communicated with the masses, and masses communicated with each other and registered their feedback on what the players were doing. It was just, forums and message boards. But there was a lot of interest in it. And there was a lot of activity from professionals who, wanted to communicate with their fans. And probably no professional player over the past 20 years has done a better job of communicating with their fans than Daniel Negreanu. Daniel is a master at social media, and he used RGP, to kind of, get in touch with the poker community. To try to, explain to them what he was up to, how he felt about the game of poker. And then he kind of drifted off into how he felt about things like politics and other players and things like that. So Daniel was a heavy user of RGP. So was Howard Lederer, who happens to be Annie Duke's brother. So let's set the Wayback Machine to 1996. A young Daniel Negreanu pulls into town, into Vegas. He's moved from Canada, and he's trying to make a name for himself as a professional poker player in Vegas. He sets his sights on the Four Queens, which is where a lot of the high-stakes games were going at that time. Also playing at the high-stakes game was Annie Duke. Annie, I just mentioned, was the sister of Howard Lederer, and Howard had encouraged Annie to move down to Vegas to try her hand at poker. The feud appears to have started in 1996 when Daniel and Annie were playing at the Four Queens, when Annie would refer to Daniel as Cup Boy. Daniel used to sit at the table with a styrofoam cup. This was something he brought with him, kind of like a habit from Canada, where he played in pool halls, and they would have like bottled water, and Daniel would fill his cup, and then he put the cup down, and somebody would take the cup. So Daniel kept the cup close to him, and he kind of brought that habit with him to Vegas. At the time, Daniel was a grinder. He was just a noob. He was just, another poker player in Vegas trying to make a name for himself. He wasn't the Daniel Negreanu that we all know today. Annie was a bully. Perhaps she was trying to fit in with the, Howard and his top shelf friends. That was her way of fitting in, was to, berate other players. It was kind of like a bad 1980s film, Daniel, in her mind, was a pleb. He wasn't worthy of her time. And not only that, he was worthy of her derision. It was really kind of bad and sad and bullying. But that changed. Fast forward to 1999, Daniel's no longer a pleb. Daniel's a World Series of Bracelet winner, and he had cashed and won several, high-profile tournaments. He made a name for himself. The poker community liked him. He was very personable. He was, active on the internet. So he was building a name for himself, and Annie started to take notice of it and started to, kind of like Daniel refers to it as phony, accept him, and bring him into the fold. But that's what she tried to do, because now he was somebody that maybe someday she could get something off of. And of course, during this time, Daniel was posting a lot on RGP. One of the posts he made, he listed the top 10 players in the cash game at Bellagio, the 500, 1,000 cash game at Bellagio. And he listed Annie as number 6 on that list. So not a lot of animosity there as far as his own professional evaluation of the players. His posts up until then were mostly tame stuff. Occasionally he'd go off on somebody or rant about something that was going on. Sometimes there might have been a little alcohol behind those rants, but he was like most of us were on the internet at the time. But by 2002, something triggered in Daniel, and he decided that he needed to go online and just kind of lay it out how he felt about Annie. Daniel starts posting session reports, and in a couple of them, he refers to an expert, what he called an expert, that bullies other players at the table at Bellagio now. At first, he's vague as to who it is, but then he starts referring to the expert as a she. So Big Brother Howard reads these posts, and he realizes that the she that Daniel is referring to is Annie Duke, his sister. So Howard starts some internet beef with Daniel, and he goes on to RGP, and he posts a letter to Daniel addressing Daniel's comments. Howard claims that Daniel refers to Annie as Annie Puke when she's away from the table. So childish. He claims that Daniel is obsessed with Jennifer Harmon, fellow poker player, and a good friend of Daniel, and that Daniel will do what he can to make sure that Jennifer is viewed by the poker public as being a superior player and person to Annie. Howard claimed that Daniel was doing this to increase his public recognition. He said that Daniel referred to Annie as disgusting. Rather than leave it as, each side had said their piece, Daniel had dived back into it again. He referred to Annie is a horrible person. He said other players found her to be a horrible person. He said that she used to look at the cards of other players. One time she swore on her kids that she hadn't done it, and everybody at the table had seen her do it. He said that she used to look at his cards all the time, and one time he tried to get her to stop doing it. She stopped doing it for a little bit, and then she started doing it again. He accused her of angle shooting, where she would say that she would split pots with people and stud 8 or better games, and then she'd change her mind and wouldn't do it. He said that Annie used to steal other people's seats. She would go to the floor at Bellagio, and if another player was a little bit late in arriving to their seat, she would claim that it was her seat, and she would berate the floor person until they'd give in and just say, okay, Annie, you can have the seat. But flip it around. Annie would be late, and they'd be giving the seat to another player, and Annie would flip out and say, how could you give away my seat? This is all Daniel saying this. This isn't me. I've heard these stories from other people, but this is Daniel in particular pointing this out in the RGP post. The Duke side never said that much publicly. Howard did write to Daniel an open letter and told him to grow up in the letter. Annie, in her 2005 autobiography, referred to Daniel as her online tormentor. She did publicly challenge some of his comments. She and Howard also sent emails to PokerStars when Daniel started saying bad things about her in the PokerStars online lobbies. At the time Daniel was represented, he was employed by PokerStars. Annie did claim that she never said anything negative or degrading about a pro. At some point around 2005, Daniel and Howard met, and they agreed to bury the hatchet as far as their own little beef was going on. Daniel referred to Howard as kind of normal, and they seemed to get along until the Black Friday came along and Full Tilt went under and UB went under, and Daniel turned on Howard and blamed him for a lot of the problems with Full Tilt. Until then, they had kind of squashed their beef. So he seems to have made peace with Howard, but not with Annie at this time by 2005. In 2005, he and Annie were, kind of at the top of the poker world. So they didn't want to tarnish their images anymore. And I think this is probably more on Daniel, because Annie seems to have just kind of like, if it came up, she'd mention something about it, but otherwise she didn't really care about it so much. Whereas Daniel, I don't think he wanted this to become too terribly public, because his image was that, he was like, this guy that was the face of poker in a lot of ways, because people outside of poker viewed guys like him, Doyle Brunson, Helmuth, they were kind of the public faces of poker. So he didn't want to diminish that. However, Daniel made comments about Annie. Annie had complained about the ladies event. She was never really a fan of the ladies event. For some reason, Daniel had a problem with her comments on it. And in an interview with a UK poker website, Daniel referred to her as the C word. Now, this was a UK site, and over in the UK, some of you may know that word is used a lot more often than it is here in the United States. But still, it caused a controversy. PokerStars had to put out a bulletin or message or whatever saying that they don't condone that type of behavior. Daniel said that he apologized to any women that were offended by the comment. But again, he didn't apologize directly to Duke. He referred to her as a C word more than once. This wasn't the only time. And this time he kind of got caught in it. In 2011, Daniel writes a blog about the Epic Poker League. This was the poker league started by Annie and Matt Savage and investors that she found. This was kind of like a pros-only type league. Daniel didn't like it. He said it was going to fail. He kind of pounced on it. People wondered if he was pouncing on it because of Annie's involvement. But he was correct that the league would fold, and he was correct as to why. They couldn't attract big-name stars because there was a money component that Annie was using to try to induce players to play. But the money never really materialized, and so a lot of players were kind of stiffed. Daniel saw this coming. He posted this in the blog, but he used it as another opportunity to attack Annie. The league folded, and as I've already covered in my Where Are They Now series, Annie left the game between Epic Poker League and Ultimate Bet folding. She was kind of like being seen as not being a really good person for poker, so she moved on to greener pastures. And with her departure from poker, the rivalry seems to have ended. But let's take a minute to discuss reactions from the poker community. While most fans, kind of stood behind their favorite player, there were a significant number of Daniel's fans that thought maybe he went a little bit too far with this. It's one thing to point out that somebody's treating you unfairly, when you're an up-and-coming player. This happens in all areas of life. It doesn't matter what your business is. There are people that are going to bully you until you do something for them or until you become a rainmaker or something like that, have some sort of power. Then they'll start being nice to you. Unfortunately, that's human nature for a lot of people. So it's not unusual for, even us, outside of the poker world to see this. But it's another to go on the attack and post long blog posts on the internet, just attacking this person, getting back at them, getting even. It kind of makes you wonder about the insecurity levels of not only the bully, but the person who's going back after the bully. It's like, let's kick them while they're down because they kicked me while I was trying to come up. It's okay to a point. If somebody comes after you, by all means, go right back after them. But at some point, you just got to kind of walk away from it and say, you know what, I'm going to live my life and not, not be wrapped up in this type of drama. It's just silly. Was Annie a dick to Daniel? Absolutely. This has been corroborated. There are people that say that he's not the only one, that she was always this type of person that if it was, someone in her orbit or her brother's orbit or something like that she was really nice. But if you couldn't really do anything for her, she really didn't have the time of day for you. Did Daniel drag this out way too far? And did he do it in a way that makes people kind of question what his real motives were? Yeah, I think so. Howard mentioned this in his post that Daniel was protective of Jennifer Harmon, and it's worth stating that, Daniel is, from what I've heard, he's a loyal friend, and maybe the loyalty just went a little bit too far with her. Maybe Annie said something about Jennifer, and that kind of triggered him or something. Maybe it just went beyond the whole cup boy thing. And also, it's worth noting that many in the poker community noted that Daniel went after Lederer, Ferguson, Annie Duke, those type of people that he didn't have a lot of interactions with or that he just didn't like. When Black Friday hit and the sites started coming down and you started hearing about super users and cheating and all that. But he didn't question his friends, who may have been involved or may not have been involved, but he was doing a lot of speculating about people that there was really not a lot of evidence on, but he wouldn't throw his own friends into that mix who, you could have easily speculated on. So yeah, there was some hypocrisy there, and a lot of it was because I think that there were certain points during the rivalry that he decided, now's a good chance to pounce on Duke and Lederer, and he took advantage of it. Which again, we all pile on people we hate. If there's a politician we don't like, and we can say something negative about them over the most trivial thing, we're going to pounce. That's human nature again. But if nothing else, it made for some good soap opera drama back in the day when everything was just in text on forums and message boards. You don't see a lot of that anymore. Now you have like Twitter beefs where people say, 5 words to someone else and somebody writes back with 5 more words of their own. So it's times have changed a little bit, but the beefs are still there, but not with Daniel and Annie. It appears as if they've just gone their ways. Annie's doing her own thing totally outside of poker. And as we've seen with Daniel, he's become wildly successful as a poker player. and he's still playing the game. So where are you on this rivalry? Are you on Team Daniel? Are you on Team Annie? Are you on Team IDGAF? Let me know in the comments, and let me know what you think about the series. I have a lot of these rivalries in mind to do, and I'll do them if this is something the community wants. So let me know, and I'll catch you on the next one.